Chapter 11. Half an hour later, back in the lab, they hooked Beth up to the machines and showed her the key. Her reaction was the same as Veronica's. They were already ready for it this time, though, and she hardly died at all. After they revived her, Veronica offered to take her back to the house and rest, but she protested that she didn't want to be alone. So Joan dug a blanket out of a cabinet, and Beth wrapped herself in it, seating herself on an out-of-the-way stool. Ed picked up the helmet, examining it. "My turn?" "Yes, that would be best," said Derek, carefully extracting the machine from Ed's accident-prone hands. Joan objected, addressing Derek. Ed, Veronica, and Beth were the three worst cases in the original curse, the only three who fainted, and the only three who went 100% blind and dumb for the full 12 hours. We already know how this is going to go. Let's spare the poor bastard his death. Nah, it's okay, Joan. Ed plunked himself down on the test subject's stool. I really appreciate that, but we actually don't know how it's going to go. Beth and Veronica have both been getting curse symptoms, and I haven't. We should see if there's something different about me and my connection to it. Derek nodded. He's right. We need this data. She glowered at him. Of course you'd say that. You don't care about anything but data. How dare you? Derek paused in his task of buckling the sensory helmet under Ed's chin, straightened his back, and smoothed down his white coat. I care a great deal about everyone affected by this curse, and that is precisely why I am so focused on collecting and analyzing this data. I have dedicated my life to the removal of the curse, and I will be damned. He pounded his fist on the lab table, and Joan jumped, eyes widening as she stared at him. If I'll allow you to reduce that to an episode of Derek the Dull and his dedication to data. His eyes blazed, and his nostrils flared as he stared at her in challenge. Joan lifted her hands in surrender, backing away. You're right. I'm sorry. As long as Ed is okay with it, let's run this test. I'll get the defib ready. Derek returned to the helmet. Thank you. Poetic, muttered Brandon to Joan. Right? Who'd have thought? By this time, everyone had their routines down, and it only took a minute or two to reset all of the equipment. Joan sat on the floor beside Ed's stool, ready to catch him and begin CPR. Brandon knelt beside her, defibrillator paddles in hand. Veronica tensely watched the aura-sensing machine, and Derek kept his eyes on the laptop screen. Beth positioned herself in front of Ed with the key in its box, poised to open it up. Ready? Derek asked the room. There were tight nods all around, and then Beth showed Ed the key. Nothing happened. There was no change to Ed's vital signs, no collapse, not even a pulse of his aura. His heart rate accelerated slightly, but that would have been normal in a tense situation. The group collectively paused, frozen and silent. Said Ed after a moment. He tilted his head, his eyes darting around the lab. Is that it? Wasn't I supposed to feel a jolt? Joan scrambled to her feet. You didn't feel anything at all? He shook his head, bewilderment written across his face. Nothing. Beth began to wail. What now? Joan asked, exasperated, turning toward her. I must have done it wrong, Beth declared. This is all my fault, and we won't have another chance. Brandon laughed, and Beth spun to glare at him. Oh, come on, Beth, he chided, standing up and brushing off his knees. How could anyone possibly fuck up the act of showing someone a key? It's obviously not your fault. He turned to Derek. Is there a possibility that the instruments malfunctioned? Derek shook his head. No. It's always possible that any given machine could be faulty, but all of them at once? Not likely. Besides, Ed himself felt that he didn't feel a jolt at all, which isn't dependent on the instruments. This must have something to do with him. They all turned and stared at Ed. He gave a weak smile. So I'm defective? Oh, sweetie, you're not defective, reassured Veronica. If anything, you're more effective than the rest of us. More effective? Joan raised an eyebrow. I mean, he's less cursed. If the key didn't trigger him like did the rest of us, right? Derek held up a mahogany hand. I wonder if this could indicate something about the key. Perhaps it's not connected to the curse after all. You can't be serious, Brandon shouted. That jolt felt exactly the same to me as the curse did. Did it feel any different to you? It felt the same as I remember, but it's been nearly 30 years. Maybe we misremembered. Or maybe it's just a coincidence that it triggered something in us and not curse-related at all. Maybe there's something else that all of us have in common which doesn't apply to Ed. Brandon shook his head. No, this is something else. Something Ed has done to distance himself from the curse's energy. Maybe something to do with his work as a ghost hunter. He's built up an immunity to supernatural energy. Well, wait a moment, Veronica objected. If anyone is immune, it's me. I'm an energy healer and a yogi. I've dedicated my life to mastering my energetic self. Actually, said Joan, That might make you more open to it. You've deliberately made yourself more energetically sensitive. Oh. Veronica's face fell. And I was already extra sensitive to begin with. It's cool, though, observed Ed. We can use this to figure out what I've done different, and then everyone else can do it, right? That might be our answer to breaking the curse. Veronica perked up. It's true. Meanwhile, I'm getting out of this getup. Ed began to unbuckle the helmet, and Derek leaped to help him with the expensive piece of equipment. I'll get that for you. Ed smirked and dropped his hands. Don't want the stoner to touch your stuff, huh? I don't want anyone who isn't a scientist to touch my delicate machinery, he corrected. Brandon nudged Joan. That's what she said, he whispered. Joan choked down a laugh, turning it into a cough, and Derek turned a narrow-eyed glance toward her. Well, she said, hastily stepping forward, I'm a scientist, so I'll just go ahead and switch off all these machines since we don't have anyone here to test. When will more be joining us? Derek inquired. And in light of this new development, I'd like to get a few outsiders in here to be tested as well to see if they react. If they do, we will know that the curse is not actually the source of the key's energy. If they don't, we still won't know for sure, but... We do know for sure, Derek insisted, crossing his arms and glowering. No, Derek snapped. We strongly suspect it. It hasn't been proven. Brandon advanced upon his old classmate, stopping an inch away from him, pushing himself into Derek's personal space. There is no question. Derek remained unmoving and unfazed. He studied Brandon's face. I understand you're reluctant to accept the possibility that this isn't the answer we'd hoped for. But if we blindly follow a lead that turns out to be nothing, we might miss a true clue. It is vital that we be certain. Joan grabbed Brandon's flannel-clad arm and held him backward, away from Derek. He's right. If we focus all our efforts on this key, and it turns out that the key isn't actually the answer, we've wasted our time. He angrily shrugged free of her grasp. Whose side are you on? I need some fucking air. Brandon stormed out of the lab, slamming the door behind him. Joan rolled her eyes. Great time for a tantrum. Derek pointed to Joan and then the door. You. Go after him. Me? Why do I have to do it? He's your fuck buddy. Bring him back so we can get this sorted out. Beth gasped, her hands flying to her face. Language! There are ladies present. Joan flipped her off as she sauntered after Brandon. I don't see any ladies here. Just two badass bitches and one whiny one. Veronica looked pleased to be included in the badass bitch club. She followed her out into the cool September mornings, catching up and throwing a companionable arm around Joan's shoulders. Joan stepped off the path and onto the yellowing lawn to evade the other woman, raising a blonde eyebrow at her. Not a hugger, dude. Veronica smirked. Don't call me that. Despite herself, Joan laughed. Touché, madam. Listen, Veronica lowered her voice as though imparting a great secret. I don't think Derek has a great understanding of human nature. Joan stared at her. You followed me out here to tell me the most obvious piece of news since the discovery of gravity? Veronica nodded emphatically. I know, right? Why did it take people so long to realize things fall down? No, but all I meant was, you're the one Brandon's annoyed at right now, so I should probably go after him, not you. Fair enough. Joan started to turn toward the lab, but another logistical thought occurred to her and she turned back. And then do you want to maybe post up on the front porch and welcome the next test subjects? They should be coming by soon, and someone needs to fill them in on what's going on and send them around to the lab. You're really more of a people person than I am. Sure. Veronica strode across the yard to the bench under the big autumn-tinted oak tree where Brandon sat with his back toward them. Even from this angle, you could see that he was still fuming, his shoulders tense, his arms making occasional angry gesticulations to himself. Joan sighed and went back into the lab, where yet another argument was in full swing. Yeah, but each time a death occurred, Ed was saying, whether it was you or Veronica. I am not dead, Beth retorted. She grabbed his hand and flailed it around. Do I seem dead to you? You were clinically dead for a moment, Derek pointed out from across the room where he was seated at the lab table, pencil scratching as he furiously recorded his notes. And when you were dead, the sensor picked up ghostly activity. Ed pounded a hand on the card table, and it collapsed with a loud clatter. The bottle of rum rolled away under the lab table, and Derek stooped to pick it up, holding it gingerly by the cap, away from his body, like one might hold a dead rat by its tail. He leaned across the table, placing it as far from his seat as he could, and then returned to his writing. Joan glared at Ed and stooped to pick up the table, flipping it onto its side to examine the legs. Ed, Derek, and Beth watched as she unfolded them, shaking each one to ensure its stability. She turned it right side up with a meaningful thump. Ed shrugged with a rueful grin, which faded as he turned back to Beth. Proof! Ghosts are real. A husky female voice drifted in from the doorway. Well, of course they are. The group turned, and there, posed perfectly in the entrance, leaning against the side of the doorway as though a movie director had arranged her there, was the most gorgeous woman Joan had ever seen. Hi. The woman smiled, shifting into, how was it possible, an even more entrancing pose, with one hand reaching up to the top of the doorframe and the other on her hip. I'm Wendy, the witch.